This is an interview with Mrs. Jean Patterson by Sheila Sweeney on April 9, 1980. The topic of the interview is Miss Carolyn Foster, and the location of the interview is Mrs. Patterson's house.
You can tell who I am.
Mrs. Patterson is Miss Foster's niece. Mrs. Patterson, tell me when you first met her and how you're related to her.
All right. Miss Foster was my father's cousin, and we were related with my grandfather and her mother, were brother and sister. Oh, well, there were other brothers and sisters in the family of Thompsons. The Thompsons came from Ohio, and then they settled in New York and in Brooklyn, and I think this is where they met, Mr. Foster and Miss Thompson, her mother, Emma. There was another brother besides my grandfather, who was William H. Thompson, who was a surrogate of Morris County. Then before that, he was sheriff of Morris Plains. He was married and had a little boy named Charlie Thompson. And this William Thompson's wife became ill and had to go away for a few years. And Mr. William Thompson and his little baby son, Charlie Thompson, went to live at Foster Fields with Miss Foster's father. Okay, and he would have been, Charlie Thompson, the little boy, would have been about 8 or 9 years, I think, younger than Cara. So he was the baby. So when he came up to live on the farm, he was just the apple of everybody's eye. You know, they just worshipped him. Should I tell you? Should we do it? Yeah. The reason why this little Charles became such a apple of Mr. Foster's eye was Mr. Foster had lost 2 little boys, one 5 and one about a year and a half, with diphtheria. And this was before Cara was born. And they were just actually heartbroken. So when the little Charles came on the property and went to live there for several years, of course he was the whole cheese. So to get back to when I first remember Cara, was this William Thompson lived at the corner of Maple Avenue and DeHart Street. And he had an old home which was actually registered in the Library of Congress because it was one of the older homes. And they lived there, and it was beautifully furnished with antiques. And they used to have the family Thanksgiving and the family Christmas. And everyone in the family was invited to their home. And Miss Foster would come. Her father at that time had passed away when I remember. I'm 53, and I think I remember her when I was about 8. I think that's about the first time I remember. I was 8 years old. And she was dressed in her traditional dress that she wore, which was a woman's skirt with a man's jacket, dress shirt and tie. Pulled her hair back severely, but her hair was very beautiful. And she'd wear flat shoes and heavy cotton stockings. So when a child saw her, you would be frightened. Actually, you would be frightened. And she'd come up to me and she'd say, "Girl, who are you?" And then she'd say, here you are. And she'd slip me $1. And the children in that time sat at separate tables, so we children, were not with the adults. We did celebrate the same food and everything, but we weren't eating with them. So the only time that was my first recollection was that she was dressed manly and would slip me $1 now and then. And the family would be very annoyed with her because she would come she had her own circle of friends. she seemed to be annoyed that she had to take time out from her friends to come to this family reunion. So she would stay just long enough, to eat and be friendly, and then she'd disappear. That was that. So then my next, our families were not my own family, my father. We were not really that friendly. My grandfather had made 3 separate millions and had spent them all. So he was not thrifty with money. So naturally, she did not care for my grandfather. He liked to buy his daughter-in-law's fur coats, fur hats. He liked to spend the money on everything. He lived luxuriously. He would just spend it. So that one minute he was rich and the next minute he wasn't. And he had always borrowing money and always in a mess, And she used to tell me when I got older, your grandfather. And I said, well, Kara, he might have lost his money, but he had a good time doing it. I always used to rub it into her. I think that's why we became very good friends, very close, because as I got older, I stood up to her. And I told my side of it, and she liked to hear that. Mm-hmm. She was quite receptive to hear how I viewed things in the family, and I saw things differently. That's the thing on the fireplace. It turns around with wind. But the next time I got to know her, of course, she had beautiful Foster fields, and we liked to ski as young children and sleigh ride. And so we asked permission from her if we could use her property to ski. So I used to take I would be in high school by then. I would take my high school friends, and we would, in those days you didn't have all the fancy ski bindings or anything, you just ski downhill. So I won't go into too much what I did, but that's when next time when I met her. And we would go in her house, and children were supposed, even that age, you're not supposed to talk, you're supposed to be seen but not heard. I was still actually afraid of her, very much afraid of her, because of her outstanding differentness, So I would just sit quietly, and my father would be there, at that particular time, and he would do the talking, and I would just sit there. And I have a brother, and of course she liked boys, so my brother got the new skis, and at that time my brother got more of the attention than I did. And then I didn't see her again. She came to my wedding. She was invited to my wedding. And she came, and she gave me a beautiful sterling silver bowl, vegetable dish. And she seemed to enjoy the wedding, still standing off in her own dignity, kind of, away from sort of the family, but still enjoying it. And then when I had my first baby, after I was married and I had my first baby, not too much was paid attention to that. But then we moved 4 doors down from William H. Thompson's home, in a little historical house that had been there for years. And so I used to go up to Mr. William Thompson's widow's, and her name was Old Aunt Maud. And at that time she was in her 80s. And of course she helped me find this little house. And so I would go up and see my old Aunt Maud. And before we moved into the little home, while we were fixing it up, we didn't have any place to go. So we went to live with old Aunt Maud for about half a year. And Miss Foster every week would bring down butter and eggs and I guess cream from the farm. But she would charge old Aunt Maud money for it. It was sweet butter. It had no salt in it, and they loved that sweet butter. show my old Aunt Maud. She was very, very religious, Aunt Maud, and she used to say, "You've got to get to know Kara. She's really, she's really beneath all that hardness. She's really a nice person, and I think you two would like each other." At that time, I was about 23. So the old Aunt Maud sort of got us together, and then I was expecting my second child, and I had another daughter. And Kara was thrilled, she was thrilled. I don't know, she seemed to just be thrilled that I had a baby girl. And she came and brought chicken and the whole meal for me, then she was opening up her heart, you see. And I was beginning to see a different side of her. And I was no longer afraid of her, let's say. And of course, I was a little embarrassed because I knew that my living standards were not the same as hers. We didn't have much money. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So she arrived at the house with the chicken, and I was upstairs in bed. And she came up, and I was in the funniest old bed, sitting way up high in a metal bed, But we had a good time, and she loved the baby. And from then on, we were friends. From then on, we communicated a lot. She actually used to say to me, "I can't stand Maud." Maud, she said, was such a dumb woman. Never had her head together, she'd say. But my grandmother, which was John's wife, she liked her very much. She thought she was very good. She was very careful. My grandmother was very careful with money and seemed to have more brains than this Maud. But Maud was the kind religious one which really invited Kara into all the parties and everything and kept in touch with her. But so then we became friends. That was the beginning of how I got to know her. Of course, my family, my mother, couldn't stand her. She used to get annoyed with me for even liking. She used to say, "I don't see what you see in that woman. She's just horrible." I'd say, "Well, I see something that you don't, probably because we're a generation different. And age, when a person ages, they mature differently, and they no longer, they become receptive of other people." And I think she began to sort of soften, I would say. As she grew older, she softened and wanted to take time to understand the family that perhaps she missed because she was so busy with her friends. And I think she could hear, like I said before, she could hear my side of it.
Mm-hmm.
And we had good times. Then, of course, I married a banker, and this pleased her. At the time, he was only a teller, but she could communicate with my husband because he was in banking, and of course, she was very interested in all money matters, so that was great. Did you hear the side of her, how she would go to the bank board meetings? She had stock in the trust company, no? She had stock in the trust company, and every, I think when they held their meetings, she would arrive. Her chauffeur would bring her down to the bank, and she'd get out. Everybody in Marstead would see her, and they'd say, "There's Miss Foster. She's on her way to the bank again." Of course, she had owned plenty of stocks and bonds, and she would cut her coupons, go in and cut her coupons, and make sure everything was being taken care of. And she'd go to the bank board meetings, and she would stand up and state her opinions of how she thought they were running the bank. And she had a great deal in common with bankers.
Mm-hmm.
So, she thought my husband was very brilliant. And he did turn out to be brilliant because he ended up being president of the bank. He started out as a teller, and he did end up to be president of the bank. And this helped unite us, sort of, give us a closer bond together. And after we lived in our little house, we wanted to go to a larger home, a new home. And we couldn't come up with the down payment. And we wanted this house so bad. We were just desperate for this house. And so, my husband was a little bit. This woman was different and frightening. Because she was so careful with her money, she wouldn't be exactly what you would call generous. So he said, Jean, we want this so bad. There's only one place we can get the money. And I said, yeah, I know. He said, I am going up to see Kara and see if we can borrow. And in those days, all we needed was $3,000. You know, it's nothing nowadays. $3,000 is, well, it's something, but I mean, it's not what you would need for a down payment now. You'd need like $40,000, or well, less maybe, but $40,000 in this market. But he went up, and I held my breath while he was gone. And I thought, oh, the poor man is sitting in that cold room talking to her. Is she going to let him have it or not? I don't think I cared so much about getting the money. I just thought, my, isn't he something to go ask for it? And she thought we agreed on an agreement where we would give her very good interest. And naturally, that pleased her. And it was not a deal between cousin and aunt. It was a business deal. It was how much interest she was going to receive and when we were going to pay her back the money. And it was all written up and signed and notarized, and that was it. And we paid her back the money over a 10-year period. $3,000 took us 10 years to pay back. That's how hard, that's how little money people had in those days. But that's because we paid it back right on time, and we kept to our word and paid it off. Then she knew we were the type of people that she could respect. You know, she got to respect us, because she always said, Jean, you should never want anything that anybody else has. What you get out of life, you should work and earn for, and you should never look at other people's things and yearn for them. You have to get them on your own. And I think that's one reason why she liked my husband so much, because he learned to get things on his own. And we struggled, and she saw us moving upward, And then we had a son, and she liked, of course, that pleased her too. And then we had a boy. We had a lot in common that we liked animals, she and I. We used to say, you could trust animals more than you could trust people, and they were your best friends. And I loved animals, and she loved animals. So we did have that great bond. Besides having the family history to discuss, we had the love for animals. I admired her. She had a great memory. She had trained her memory. She had educated herself. She trained her memory. She could recite Romeo and Juliet. She just had a beautiful memory. She studied every chance she got. She studied, stars, astrology. She studied. She liked gardening. She studied as much as she could about the different flowers and their names, and she just educated herself. She liked, her love was courier knives. That was her hobby. I don't know if anyone else told you that. She ended up, when they over 100 courier knife prints, she used to go to auctions and buy up the courier knife prints. And I don't know. How am I doing?
All right. What organizations did she belong to, and how did she contribute to them?
She belonged to many, but her two favorite ones, I think Memorial Hospital, she enjoyed quite a bit, because they used to have their women's organization, and she was more active in that before I knew her. My mother used to tell me how she liked to work at the fairs and, all the money-raising things she enjoyed helping with. And that was one of her loves. She belonged to some kind of a bee club because she kept bees.
She did?
Yeah, she kept bees. She was a founder of the Morris County Golf Course. I don't know if anyone told that. She was one of the early founders. She had many sterling silver trophies that she'd won.
Where you went, so
Association out here, which she was one of the founders of.
someone's here.
Good water. The Washington Valley Association, the women had a branch which they called the Home Economics Club. It started out, and I don't know what year it was founded. Barbara could tell you. Barbara Hoskins would know. But they started out in a little schoolhouse, Washington Valley schoolhouse, and they would bring their favorite recipes, their canning things, canning recipes, and they would it was actually home economics. They would discuss food and farming, gardening, and it didn't start out as a social club, but it ended up as a social club where the women just in the valley, new members, new homeowners would be invited into the Washington Valley Home Economics, and it was the way to meet your neighbors and to discuss different things that were going on in the valley. We sort of look after what's happening to the land and different codes, different building codes and different restrictions that we have out here. But it ended up to be a social group. Well, after we lived in our second home, we decided, after visiting Foster Fields and Miss Foster's beautiful farm, we decided we'd like to live out in the valley. So we purchased our home in the valley about 20 years ago. I don't know how old she would be then. She would be 20 from 102. She was thrilled to think that we now were going to be neighbors of hers. And I was invited to join the Home Economics Club. And we meet once a month. And I was always very proud to be her cousin, because by this time she gained great respect from the women. They all loved her. Even though she was standoffish in her dress, they respected her wisdom. And I used to be so proud to say, well, she's my cousin, you know. And she would always smile at me. We were very, very close at this particular time in our lives. Let me see if I can tell you about any of the other clubs she belonged to. Must have been the Stamp Club she belonged to, all historical societies. She was Washington Association. That's just a few of the ones. I'm sure she belonged to many. Everything that had to do with history, every new club that started up that had to do with history. And the McCullough Hall, which was Parson Todd's home, she was interested in that. She was interested in the Alfred Vail property. Anything that had to do with history, she loved it, especially local history. She liked to, contribute to what she knew about it. She was always contributing things about the homeowners and the land and the politics and everything. She loved her town. She really did. But she was the committee woman, and I'd have to have someone look. You'll have to have someone look that up. But she loved politics. I think next to managing money, politics was very. She had a great patriotism. Put it that way. Very patriotic. She voted she never missed an election, and she was right up on all of it, and she was a Republican through and through. And she could never stand for any nonsense, and she could not stand President Roosevelt and his fireside chats. And one time I got a record that had been remade that was Roosevelt's fireside chats, and I gave it to her. Oh, she was so upset. She said, I do not want to hear Roosevelt's fireside chats. I hated the man. You know, she was a Republican through and through. In her later years, of course, she was honored because of her age. And they had when the bicentennial year came, she and Parsons Todd, they were about 6 months, I think, difference in age. And this time must have been close to 100. They were honored, and they were the grand marshals in the parade, I think, the two of them. And she was very proud. She was a very proud woman, and she loved to be fussed over. She just loved being fussed over. And she loved to celebrate her birthdays. She didn't care when anybody else's birthday was. She never even knew when my birthday was, or could care less. But if you forgot her birthday, you all had to make a big fuss, right? Make a big fuss over her birthday. I think because she was, you might say, raised as an only child because the two boys had died, because they were frightened that perhaps something would happen to her, she was very protected in her early childhood. And I think possibly, though she might not say, and the father didn't understand her, I think she was spoiled. Mm-hmm. When you say self-centered, spoiled, she never cared too much of what was happening to anybody else. It was her that was the key figure. She was very queenly, I would say. She wanted to be treated like special. She commanded that dignity and respect. Don't you think so, Cindy? Mm-hmm. She was, half the time she couldn't remember people's, she said, well, who are you? She was a good one for putting people down. And if she didn't like anyone, she would make sure they knew she didn't like them. She didn't mince words. And in today's world, I think you would call her what? She was not bigoted, but she was brought up where antisocial? What do you call it?
I don't think it's because of her mind.
Right.
But she had so much money that she could afford to be like that.
Yeah, she could afford to be hard.
And she almost had to be I guess she wondered who was going to get her money is.
Yeah, she had to become hard. That's true. They ran a thing in the paper about her farm. I think on one of her birthday parties that she celebrated, they ran quite a nice spread in the paper. And after that, she had 2 or 3 people write, people that she didn't even know from, say, one was, I don't know, down in Newark, and I don't know where the other one was from. They were really quite comical. They were saying, dear Miss Foster, I know you're turning your home over to the park system, but we would have better use. We've always wanted a farm. Would you mind leaving it to us? But she got quiet. She saved the letters. I have the letters. She got such charges. People would have such nerve to ask her for her property. So I think she did. She became very protective of what she owned. She never gave a thing away of her personal belongings. Never. If someone admired something, or if we were having, the home economics was having a flea market or a small auction sale, she would not go into her china or anything and take a piece out and give it to them. She'd go to another flea market and get something and donate it from someplace else, because she didn't want to give one thing away. When she died, there were about 2 generations of collection of things that they had collected. Nothing was ever given away, ever. If a piece of furniture broke down, it was repaired. If anything was broken, even a piece of china chipped, it was restored. It was, I guess you'd call it a hoarding of things. It was take care of what you have. She had great respect for property. Had great respect for property. I think that would probably be it. She had great respect for even her farm or everything. If her equipment wasn't being taken care of, if the motor was broken in the help didn't mend it right. She said, "Oh, those fools, what's the matter with them? Can't they learn how to take care of a piece of equipment?" She was very impatient with people that were less intelligent than her. Very impatient. She just had no patience with it at all. She would say, "Oh, can't stand it,"
Yeah.
She was a very thrifty person. Very. To the point where she ordered, I heard the story where she ordered 13 feet of rope, and the hardware owner had 14 left on the roll and sent her the 14 feet. She cut the extra foot off and sent it back and said, "I won't pay for it." That type of thing. She knew what she wanted, and that was it. Nobody fooled her. She had butter and dairy products, and she sold them to the family. She wouldn't give them to the family. You bought them from her. If she had a vegetable garden and her friends in the valley wanted some vegetables, she would weigh them out and charge them for the vegetables, even though she had millions of dollars. It was just the way it was done. It's kind of
That's why she had millions of dollars.
That's why she had millions of dollars. Yeah.
Did you talk about the house?
No, I haven't gotten into the house yet. Have you been in the house?
Mm-hmm. Once.
As I say, every piece of furniture that were her mother's, her ancestors, the Fosters, the Thompsons, everything was there. Every piece of clothing that belonged to the brothers, every toy, every magazine that they ever brought into the house was saved. Believe you me, it was some collection. Everything, every paper, every piece of sheet music, I don't think they ever threw one thing away. And it took me 6 months with another woman to sort it. Mm-hmm. Letters, every letter, all tied up in neat little bundles and saved. I forgot to tell you, she loved the opera. She knew the opera through and through. And there were 2 other women in our family. They were called the DuBarry sisters. They were I think a Thompson married a DuBarry. And they were the DuBarry sisters, and they were very fashionable, and they wore beautiful, beautiful clothes. The latest fashion they would have from Paris. And they would go to the opera together with Cara. And Cara knew all the operas through and through. All the characters had been to all the operas. And I liked the opera, and so we did have that in common. We used to discuss operas. She was much more educated in operas because I was just a beginner learning the opera, and I used to become embarrassed because,
Mm-hmm.
she'd say, well, that roll or this piece of music, and oh dear me, will I ever be that intelligent? But she had nothing to worry about because she never, I'll tell you, I'll put this, because she never cooked. She never had to cook.
Mm-hmm.
She never had to do laundry. She never had to do housekeeping. She lived the life of a true lady. All of her time was for her alone. She had no demands on her life. When I knew her, her father was dead. She had money at her command. Her whole life was open to her. She could do whatever she wanted. She had everyone waiting on her. She had one little, I think she was a Swedish maid. And she cooked beautifully, waited on Cara. Like a mother would wait on a daughter, this little maid did. And then she had the farm help. And Cara, she ran the farm, kept the farm going, and she kept her money under control, and that was her life, her politics and her money and her farm. Mm-hmm. And she very seldom left the farm. And I asked her one time when she was very, very ill, just before she died, I said, Cara, no, I guess it was before she died, it was about 2 or 3 months before she died. I knew her very well. I could be very outspoken to her. And I said, Cara, have you found the mystery of life? You know the mystery of life? And she said, yes. But that's all she said. And she said, there was some quote, and she said, I know what is here. And I don't know who wrote this, and maybe you do. She said, I know what is here, but what is beyond is a mystery. So she said, I'll stay here as long as I can. She was not a religious person. At times I thought she was an atheist. She didn't like all that bother about religion. She didn't like organized religion. She never cared too much for the church. That we did not have in common because I was very close to the church. And this used to annoy me a little bit, and this is why I used to kind of question to see how she felt about, life. And I don't know. She was very knowledgeable, and I think she had studied a lot, and I don't know whether she believed in hereafter or not. I don't know. I really don't, but I think she did. But she became very mellow as the years passed, and she became more patient with people. The nurses, if you should interview the nurses, they have great things to say about her last years. They miss her. Everybody misses her. She was like a legend, It's like a part of history, just the end. She's one of the last few living women like this, because this era is gone. I forgot to tell you, she loved horses. She rode as ladies did in those days. She would ride side saddle because no lady would straddle a horse. You'd have to ride side saddle. And she would ride into town, as I say. Everybody thought she was a stunning woman. She would be almost a beautiful woman. She had beautiful, soft brown eyes. She had lovely, thick brown auburn hair in those days. She had my father and mother both said she had a very beautiful figure, even though she dressed as a man. As she became older, she was still not beautiful as she was older, but her hair was still very soft and lovely, and her complexion, for 102, she wasn't badly wrinkled. Her face began to settle as she got old. You could tell she was very, very old because her face she settled. She was old. But when Cindy knew her, and she was never stay home. She might have feared for her health a little bit, but she believed in not giving in to it. She would go out to her nightly meetings. I think she kept guns around her. I know she kept guns. She would be not afraid to shoot a gun at somebody if they trespassed into her home. She had no fear of living in that house by herself, which most women might be. It was a huge house, and we thought very spooky. Cindy and I wouldn't stay in it one night alone. But she had no fear. I would not say that she had no fear of anything like this. Never did she ever show any fear. She was very direct in her way of speaking to doctors, dentists, any political man. She was very outspoken, very direct. If she didn't like a thing, she told it. When the last accident that killed her, the nurse, it was an accident. The nurse slipped on the rug, and they both went down. It was actually the nurse's fault, in a way. And the nurse went in to see her, and she said, Kara, I'm terribly sorry that you fell. And I fell with you. And she said, that doesn't do me any good now. She was very annoyed at she had no patience with any kind of an accident or anything. You just should never make an excuse. There was no apologizing with her. You just did it right the first time. You shouldn't have to apologize. You should be smarter. You should be smart enough so that you don't have to apologize. Apologies were not accepted. It was just stupidity. If you did anything wrong, you were stupid. You just couldn't be stupid. She had very impatient with people that were lesser educated and that type of thing. She didn't have patience for it. She was sort of
Talk about building the house.
yeah. Mhm. Maybe you have some more you can help us with.
What about her friends? You were talking. Remember, you started
Yes,
talking
well,
about.
I don't know. She was in. I was saying she was in the 400, and she was accepted in what they called high society. We call it high society, which is sort of a thing of the past. And they had Madison Avenue was Millionaires Row, which they called it, which was supposed to be. I don't know how many millionaires lived on Madison Avenue. It was one of the richest communities, I guess, in the United States. Many millionaires lived on many big mansions, and she was accepted in that high society. And she went to many parties, and she would. A few times she would. Very few times did she dress up in an evening gown and go as a woman. Most of the time she dressed in her dress, which was men's clothing. I have several of her dress jackets, which she wore, which was a black velvet jacket with tuxedo jacket with satin lapels and satin cuffs. And they're very fashionable now, the black velvet jackets. So I this year wore her black velvet jacket, and it really was stunning. And she had a brown velvet dress jacket, but then she would wear either a long skirt or say something short skirt. But she went as a man to these parties, and this is the way she was accepted. I won't go into that I don't know more about it. Except my family said the reason why she dressed up as a man or a boy in their early childhood was to please the father because he lost the two boys. And that was the outcome. And then, as we said, she had to be hardened because she had this money to take care of, and she had to be accepted by men on a business deals, And if she dressed and talked like a man, she could use her persuasion to get what she wanted. And this is the way she was. And she would call the stockbroker every day. Stockbroker was called every day on which stocks to buy and which not to buy, and how the money was and all this. She kept up on all the bonds, all the stocks. In fact, as time got on, they used to just begin to get a little annoyed. I know the stockbrokers, and they'd say, "Oh my gosh, she's asking the same questions over and over again," And she was always searching for knowledge. If she wasn't reading about it, she was searching it through people. She was a good one for knowledge. Let's see what else she did. You can ask me another question.
Since she dressed this way, even when she was young, the people that she, associated with had just as much money, but they didn't dress that way. How do you think they viewed her? Do you think that she was accepted?
I think, yes, I think in those days, if you read literature, she was a conversational piece. She was because she dressed different, she was interesting. She was arty. She was like what you would call now like a hippie. You know how when the hippies first came out, well, they weren't accepted always. I don't think it would be, more of an art type. I think eccentric.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that swinging, I think they were swinging groups. They had nothing to do. They were frivolous, fickle. And they had gay parties, great parties. And I think they were excited by her looks. Don't you?
They probably questioned in their mind why she was dressing like that, but because she was the one to know.
Because of her money.
They wanted to be with her.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because money gets you into a great many places. Let's put it that way. I think money played a part. Would have to.
Yeah, they knew there was, I mean, let's face it, not everyone dresses like that.
Mm-hmm.
But she was so prestigious.
Mm-hmm. You know, in the rich society like that, the new rich. She used to talk about the new rich and how they would show off all their things. They were so gaudy and giddy, you know. She used to tell us we used to talk about the new rich, she'd call them, and they had to dress up and prove themselves, you know. But the old rich, they could go in their sneakers, their run-down clothes. It was the in thing, you know. If you had a lot of money, it didn't show that you had it. This is what she was trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
If you had a lot of money, you just, you know, you were in with your friends, but just, you know, you didn't have to prove yourself. You didn't have to prove yourself. You're already there.
Mm-hmm.
Great family, great one for history. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I think they were so. I'm glad that Anna's gone. I am. It's that much better now. Everybody has equal opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
They kept the poorer class down. Definitely keep them down. There was one side of her that I didn't like. One political side was when we lived on DeHart Street and they had the old Maple Avenue School. It was a terrible old school. It was run down terribly, shabby. It was a fire trap. And my oldest daughter was getting ready to go to this school. She would then go into this fire trap. And the vote was coming up to the school board. And she was for keeping the old school. Money meant more to her than a child's protection. And this side of her annoyed me. I thought, now look, if you had, I know you would feel differently if you had a young child that you dearly love. You would put your money into a better school. You wouldn't, you know, and I got very hurt because she was voting against the new school. But they did get the new school, and they missed the new school, but miser.
Mm-hmm.
What do you say? Money before. Same way in the home. You know, she had plenty of money. She wouldn't update. You know.
Mrs. Patterson continued. Okay.
Gee.
Miss Foster was very involved in the community, very involved in politics, in all these activities. What prompted her to become involved in these? Was it her family or something else? Or was it her own decisions or something else?
It was mostly, I think, her friends that involved her gradually into the community, and her interest in the different aspects of what was going on outside of her own environment. And I think that pulled her out into the different historical societies. She was very interested in antiques and the history of the country. And this, I think, was her. I think it was her curiosity. Also, other than her friends, I think her curiosity brought her out.
Mm-hmm.
So that she and her interest to learn more, her desire for knowledge brought her out. Her father wouldn't allow her to have a car, and her friends felt very, very sorry for her because this was just when the cars were becoming fashionable. They'd given up the horses; they were now going to cars. And for her birthday, her friends bought her a car and presented it to her on her birthday. Her father was absolutely wild, furious. I don't know where she actually kept it. He was so mad that they'd gone against him and gotten the daughter a car. But she must have been in her 20s when this happened. I mean, she was old enough to, make up her own mind. But she called her dad Pa. She always said Pa didn't like this and Pa wouldn't let me do that, And Pa called her the girl. Behind when he wrote about her, I don't know what he called. He must have called her Cara, but they called her Pa. But She was an affectionate little girl, they said. Everybody, all the uncles and aunts all thought she was very affectionate and very pretty and rather well behaved. I think she was a disciplined problem in an early age. I think she was probably very lonely person because her mother died when she was young. And naturally it would be hard to have any upbringing.
What about, was her family religious?
The aunts were very religious. Mother was very religious because of the insecurities of the world. The religion, the medicine was not up to today's medical miracles. So when they got to a disease that was frightening, the only thing they had was to pray to God. And their whole life's existence was beyond them. It was more of a mystery, I think, even than today. Then the world was narrower then. That's not just taking away from religion today, but I think religion then was more sensitive than it is today. Much more sensitive, much more personal than it is today. And I think as she became educated and questioning, she didn't rely on it. She didn't want to be that frivolous. She wanted to be more in command of her own life. I think that's the way we put it. She wanted to be her own boss and in command of her own life. She didn't want anybody else to be, controlling her. She was a very powerful, self-willed person. That's the way I would put it. Can you? But perhaps I'm making it sound, I keep saying that she's that way, but she had a great sensitivity to nature. She did have a kindness. There were tears in her eyes when she lost her best friends. She was very moved by the loss of, she was very moved by death. It was very upsetting to her in her little daily memos. Whenever anyone died, I could see 2 or 3 days later she would become ill. And I think this was because it hurt her so deeply, or whether she was frightened that something was going to happen to her. She would become ill. But she was very sensitive. More to nature than to people. Not exactly trusting person of people. I think she probably had a lot of mistrust because of her money. But I saw in her later years a very gentle, loving person, which a lot of people might not see. I think her close friends saw it, but I think to the average person just viewing her on the street or just reading about her, they think she was a hard type of person. But she did mellow and soften. But she didn't actually change her views. As I say, she would become impatient by stupidity. She never changed in that respect. But she became vulnerable because of her age. She had to soften because she was no longer, or physically she was weak. So she was helpless. So that's sad. That's very sad. To all her friends, it was very sad to see her, see a once very powerful woman become immobile and have to be. And she would say, I would say, "How are you today, Karen?" She'd say, "No good." So I just go from here to there and back. And she felt cooped up in her body. Most old people do feel this way, but she more than most people. She just wanted to. She just couldn't stand it. She loved the beauty. She loved the nature. You could just tell. She's sitting there on the porch. It was sad. Old age, that old, is very, very sad because you knew that she had been a very going person and then all of a sudden have to stop.
Mm.
You know, sad. Very sad. She did not get much out of life the last couple of years, even though she was mentally with it. Life became more difficult each day because of her health.
Yeah. In 1977, there was a quote in the Daily Record, and it quoted her as saying, "I'm a tough old broad
It was a
bird." I'm a
it was bored.
It was broad. And then I was corrected to say that she said bird.
She said bird, and that was, the reporter was called on that. And
Really?
that was a bad slip. Yeah, that was a terrible thing. That was such an insult to say about her.
Yeah.
That it was so hurting that nothing could erase that. She would never use that word. She herself would never use the word broad. I don't even think she knew the word broad.
Uh-huh.
She would say bird.
But she also said she was the first women's libber in the same quote.
She did. Well,
what do you think she meant by it? Or
I think she helped open doors for women, even though she would not represent the dainty, feminine, fickle. She didn't care for the fickle type woman. But I think she did open doors in her own way. But she tried to meet the men on their ground instead of going in a feminine manner.
mm-hmm.
But because this would not have been accepted in that time, it was the only way she could do it. So she did have a secret. She did do it. She did open doors. She was unique. I can't say she helped all women, but she opened her own doors.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think she did too much for the rest of the women, but she got in. She was accepted. She could talk to men on their terms, and they would listen. But that's as far as she went, as far as women's went.
Mm-hmm. How did her father feel about
He
this?
just didn't understand any of it. That was all. He said, I don't understand the girl. She's gone. She's never home. Never home. I don't know what she's doing. And so then in her later years, she felt, she was very saddened because as you grow older, you realize that when you're young, you don't realize what an impact you're having on your parents. And as she got older, she saw things in a different view, and she was sorry that she didn't have more patience with her father. I have letters that her father wrote to my uncle, and her father said, Bill, if anybody had told me that old age was like this, he said, I never would have wanted to live this long. That was her father speaking. And I'm sure Kara felt that way too. I think she would have. Even though she said she knew what was here and the mystery beyond, she would stay here as long as she could. I think it became harder and harder for her.
Mm-hmm.
Because she was helpless.
Oh, have you any idea why she never married?
No, I don't. I think she had one lover. She used to keep a picture of a man on her table, but I'm not sure whether that was her lover or her best friend's husband. So I don't know. I kind of think it was Mrs. Ford's husband. But whether one of her friends and she liked the same man, I don't know, or whether she just admired him. I don't know if she had any actual lovers or not. I couldn't say. Never heard of any, except for this one picture. But then when I asked this friend of hers about it, I think she said it was her husband, and I thought, well, that's strange. Whether they both liked the same person, or whether she, as I said, whether she just admired this man and kept his picture out.
Mm.
Yeah. But I never heard of a love affair. No.
She kept everything very secret.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, if she did have something that would incriminate her, it's more gone for any reason. I mean, there was nothing that would hint of her private life.
No,
Not really.
no,
In her personal
no.
affairs.
Jewelry. We found very little jewelry. Naturally, she wore very little jewelry because she wanted to be like a man. She wore no earrings.
Okay, what about she and Parsons Todd?
Well, I think because they had the same interest in antiques and in Morristown, this was their interest. They had no love interest, or as they got older, people built this up. It became kind of cute that the two of them in their 90s might like each other. They admired each other. He used to send her a birthday cake every year, and I think the competitiveness that they had together, they were both trying to outlive each other. I think she said she was going to outlive him. But in their early, this relationship only happened within the last 10 years of her life. Before that, they never mentioned. I never even heard her mention Parsons Todd. So that was a later one. I think people built it up because they were so old.
Mm-hmm.
They were like a legend, you know.
Yeah. Can you tell me something about her home, Foster Fields?
Her home actually was her whole life. Was her own little world, was her land and her home. It was very personal to her. She entertained very seldom, allowed no groups to come into her home. Her art collection was one of her most precious hobbies, and one of her most precious collections was her Currier knife collection, which she spent probably from her middle life on collecting. She was very proud of that. She had a lot of the family, both Foster and Thompson heirlooms, which she prized and kept. She did not seem to use much color in her home. Her home was very dull and drab, and it was not luxurious. It was very simple. Even though the antiques were very valuable and beautiful, her home was not an expression of her in a certain way. It was very dull. It was kept exactly like it was when her father was living. She never changed a thing. The paint on the walls was always restored in the same color. Fabrics were very neutral. She had a beautiful four-poster bed with a canopy on top. And she had very many beautiful things, but you would not say her home was a luxurious place to go into by any means.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it didn't have that grand feeling of beautiful chintz drapes and thick carpets and beautiful upholstery, or, you know, it was not coordinated all together. It was like a collection of antiques. It was not anything that was thought out. It was just, here it is. Here's my collection.
Yeah.
You know. That's about all I can say about her house. She was very particular how it was cleaned. She kept it very beautifully when she was in good health. Every piece of china or ornament was dusted regularly, and the rugs were taken out, and, you know, she was good. Everything was packed away carefully.
Mm-hmm.
She prized her possessions. I think she probably prized her possessions a little too much. I think they hindered her. I think possessions became an obsession, got in her way.
Mm-hmm.
She worried about. She had them. They worried her what she was going to do with them, who she was going to leave them to. It was too much of a burden. I think she would have been better free of them. was heated by coal. She never converted, and the caretaker used to have to come up on a winter's night at 4 o'clock in the morning and stoke the furnace every morning. So, and it was really quite a chore. And she never had her fireplaces going because she was afraid of they were deadly afraid of fire. Never liked the fireplaces, afraid the house would burn down.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a warm, it was not a warm place. It was not a house with a lot of parties, and it was not a happy home.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think people, people make a home,
Yeah.
and it was lonely, very lonely. I always felt it was very lonely.